Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Well, good evening, Don. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely great, William. It's been a wonderful day here in southern Oklahoma. Weather-wise, it's just wonderful.
Well, that's great.
And you, how has your day gone?
Well, I've been jumping up and down all day long. There have been all kinds of things going on in my world. I probably got outside maybe twice to go to the mailbox. I think I went out earlier today to run an errand, but for the most part, it's been lots of work on the computer and on the telephone and just back and forth. But I'm grateful that we are broadcasting. We have several people in the chat room already, and they were here early. And I tell you, that is a great testimony to Fulfill Radio and Two Guys and a Bible. And I've got to remind myself to do a little editing, which I will make sure I take care of. But we are grateful for the opportunity, and I'm glad that we're back in a way where we can interact with the audience as well. So we appreciate that opportunity. And you've had some interesting things going on recently. Of course, I had some interesting things going on that I don't think even anyone knows about.
Well, maybe you ought to tell us about this.
All right. Well, let's talk about it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I had been challenged to a debate by Kurt Simmons of Carlsbad, New Mexico. And, I'm not so much the debater. Don is the debater in the group. I've had one debate, had lots of mock debates, but not many formal debates. And had one public oral debate back in 1973 or 74, somewhere around there. And but I had been having some conversations with another brother on the subject of resurrection. And I presented a lesson right here on Blog Talk Radio not long ago on the tabernacle and the temple and submitted that for some evaluation and feedback. Well, what I got back was a debate challenge on the resurrection. And so I gave some consideration and thought that that subject would be worthy to debate from the perspective of the nature of the resurrection body, because we do have those variant views out there with the concept of the individual body at death, and we have resurrection only being that which pertains to Hades and has nothing to do with justification from sin. And then we have the covenantal body view, which is what the view that they take. And so we agreed to some propositions. We agreed to a time to start the debate. I was wanting to start a little bit later, but my opponent wanted to start in November and was ready to start, said he knew my position already. I actually had once been a covenant eschatologist, if you please. And so he wanted the debate to start November the 1st, and so that's what I've been doing lately, is just hustling like a squirrel gathering nuts for the winter, trying to put all of my study together and arguments together. And so he asked for the first affirmative, and, we agreed to that, we agreed that we were going to submit questions. So we got all our rules together, agreed on those. We agreed to exchange questions. And the only thing that was stopping the debate at this point, or that was preliminary, was to get our 10 questions answered from each of us and then move forward into the discussions with our affirmatives. And, of course, he was going to be in the affirmative for the first written speech. This debate was supposed to be 15 pages each for each speaker, 3 affirmatives and 3 negatives per speaker, and up to 15 pages, that is. And, of course, to, follow along the argumentation and the propositions, which, of course, is standard in debating. Well, we submitted the questions. Well, first, he submitted the first question because he was in the affirmative, so he went ahead and said, let's get this ball rolling, submitted his first question. And I responded to that question, I guess, within the first hour. I think I sent it back to him within about an hour, or it may have been a couple hours or whatever, but it was the same night. After that is where everything started to go downhill because I submitted my question to him after answering his question, and to this date, I have not yet received an answer to my question.
Wow.
I get a lot of, you might say,
rhetoric.
Rhetoric. Thank you, Don, for giving me some nice words to use. So I got a lot of rhetoric back concerning the question and what maybe he thought my answer should have been, et cetera. And clearly, in my opinion, a violation of the rules of our discussion. And so it's stalemated at this point. We have not moved beyond that, and I just, decided that until I get an answer back to the question, we are not going to move forward. And nothing else has happened since then. And I know that this question took place, at least I think it was about Saturday when I got the question, either late Friday night or Saturday when I got the question, because I was involved in a funeral over the weekend, and so time kind of slips away. But that's the story of it. And so the Simmons-Bell debate is right now in limbo on the resurrection, and I think it would have certainly been at least I think there would have been some good information to be shared on the subject of resurrection as it pertained to these particular views. And as I said, I had been in some discussions with another brother, and I have actually written I have a written response that's currently being reviewed. So I haven't published it yet, but I do intend to publish it as a response to another paper that has been written and been circulating for some time, actually, since we did the Kansas seminar a few years ago. It was about a year or so ago.
Last year.
Yeah, it was just last year? Wow.
Yeah, 2011.
Time. I must slow down. But that's kind of the state of affairs with me, so it's unfortunate that it will not move forward. I had actually written a blog post, too, still have it in draft form, was ready to punch the button and say the debate was underway. And after I didn't get the question and response and, the rhetoric that went on, I couldn't even say our debate had started. So it was almost a wasted effort. At least it is up to this point. So I don't know what will happen in the next few days, but let's hope that the answer to that question is coming. But I kind of doubt that it will come, because that question is one that I think just pretty much wipes out any opposition, an argument that might be advanced during the discussion, because it hits right at the center.
In debate protocol, it's really inappropriate for one man to tell another man how he can ask his questions, what questions he can ask, how he can formulate them, and what, how to go about it. I mean, it's certainly the right of each disputant to ask the questions that he feels are directly pertinent to help him understand the other man's position and to provide the information that he needs to proceed. And so it's disingenuous, to say the least, for someone to say to you, and it would be disingenuous for you to say to Kurt, you can't ask this question or that question. I don't like the way you formulated your question, so you redo your question and I'll answer it. That's just simply not the right of either man, in debate negotiations, or at least it's never been my experience. And I've had people refuse to answer questions, for sure, but I must be honest, I've never, ever had anyone to say to me, you've got to reformulate your question. I won't answer the question the way you asked it, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, it's a little bit disingenuous.
Yeah, well, we never got.
I've had people say from time to time, "Would you mind clarifying your question? I don't understand this. I don't understand this point of your question, etc." But to just blatantly refuse to answer another man's questions, and especially to say, "I refuse to answer the question in the form you submitted it," that's just not the way to go about things.
Well, Don, I don't think that's what he said. I think he was more complaining about the answer that I gave. He was just basically saying I should have answered this way, or I should have answered that way. I would call that, especially in a legal scenario, counsel is leading the witness.
Well, that's certainly correct. When you provide an answer based on your own personal convictions and understanding of Scripture, again, no one has a right to say you shouldn't answer that question that way. I don't accept your answer that way. Well, if it's what you believe in response to the question, then take it.
That's right. And the interesting thing about it is the answer that I gave was directly within my proposition. It was already defined in the proposition. It was already stated. So all I was doing was restating what had already been illustrated in the proposition. And the other part about it was that I specifically chose some of the words that the opponent used to define the very same topic and use them. And it was just real interesting with the comments that I got back relative to that question, and especially
needless to say,
in saying that I didn't answer it, and yet not one single word has been submitted in response to the question that I submitted.
Yeah. Well, it's really sad that someone would act in that sort of way because, of course, I'm well aware of the fact that he has actively pursued this debate with you, just couldn't hardly contain himself in his challenge to you. And so for him now to seemingly, on the surface of it, it certainly has the appearance that he really is trying to back out of the debate by saying he doesn't like your answer to the question he posed. He won't accept your answer as you submitted it, and furthermore, he won't even answer the question that you submitted to him. That's hardly an ethical way to go about dealing with a debate that you personally sought and solicited. And again, what you just pointed out, you most assuredly did use the very terminology that he himself has used. That's the ironic thing about this. You basically used statements that he himself is on record using in your correspondence with him, and now he doesn't like it. So that's very ironic, to say the very least.
Yes, it is. Well, you're a person that has had many debates. You know the protocol of debating inside and out. It's almost as interesting to listen to you talk about the rules and the protocol of debate as it is to hear you debate. But not quite. But at the same time, I know that a lot of people appreciate that. And I know you've been asked several times to provide some instruction or teaching on that. So that might be one of your little books that you write in the future on the protocol of debating, because that would certainly be of benefit to all of us who have not studied the subject as in depth as you have, and certainly don't have the experience that you have in doing so.
Well, it's an interesting idea. I might consider that among the many other book projects that I have.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm hopeful that...
Speaking of book projects, I've had a bunch of inquiries of people wanting my PowerPoints and wanting my lesson that I presented at the Criswell College on October the 12th. And, William, you well know that my invitation to speak down there, my presence there has caused, as I've shared with a couple of people, a lot of weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth in the anti-preterist camp. What's interesting, on the one hand, letters were written. Joel McDermott wrote a letter to Criswell College trying to get them to boot me off of the dais. He said he was aware of others who had written letters. We've since found out that other letters were written to Criswell attempting to get them to boot me off the dais. Well, of course, that didn't work. And then another anti-preterist wound up writing an article posted on a blog and said that after all, Criswell College may have done the religious community a tremendous service by having me there to speak because, well, of course, his article was a scurrilous, dishonest attack on my personal integrity, saying that I had never been forthright in sharing my ideas about my views on Christ and whether or not he has a physical, fleshly body in heaven. Of course, that's just a blatant falsehood. William, I mean, you've known me since 1982. You've known my views. My views have been in my books. I have literally preached in foreign countries as well as numerous locations here in America, a lesson entitled "In the Glory of the Father," based on Matthew 16:27-28. And I have stated every time I preach that lesson, and I can't even count the number of times I've preached the lesson, how many different states I've preached in, but be that as it may, I have openly stated that the purpose of the parousia was not to reveal Christ as a man, a 5'5" Jew. It was to reveal him as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, to reveal him as God, the one true God. 1 Timothy chapter 6, 15 and 16. And yet this individual writes this scurrilously libelous, slanderous article saying that I have never been forthright about my views on Christology. But then he said that since I was forced, in spite of myself, forced to reveal my true views on Christology, that Criswell had actually done the Christian community a tremendous service by having me there. So on the one hand, people tried to get me booted off, and now here's this slanderous individual saying that, well, after all, it did a tremendous service to the Christian community by having me there, by supposedly revealing my true views. Well, of course, again, my views have been known by anyone who's paid attention to what I've said, and I've called for an apology from this individual. I've written 2 articles completely and totally refuting what he had to say. Sam Frost and Jason Bradfield both responded to him saying that what he said was untrue, that my views were well known and are well known in the preterist community. Jason Bradfield told me or mentioned in a post that he was going to try to get the article removed. Well, it's still there. Was as of yesterday, I believe. So there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the admins, if you please, of the blog when they know for a fact that the author of the article was telling an untruth, a blatant falsehood. In Oklahoma, we got a word for that, and it's called a lie. And I hate to be so blunt, but there's not another word for it. I mean, there's simply not another word for it. But anyway, so for the owners and the admins of that site to refuse or to fail to take his article down doesn't speak very highly of their own ethical and moral standing. If you allowed an article to be on your website that you know for a fact is a libelous, slanderous lie, and you don't take it down, then there's something wrong. There's something really badly wrong.
Yeah, Don, let me also say this in defense of your view. You may recall years ago when you and I were writing for the Living Presence, I wrote an article, I published a track, and I think also published it as an article as well, on Acts 1:11 and the same Jesus. You recall that article?
Yes.
Well, that article was posted on your website, and with an endorsement from you, and it's been there for years. It has been out for years because I wrote it way back in the 80s, I think. late 80s or early 90s when I wrote that article, and it deals with the body of Jesus in terms of his resurrection and in terms of his ascension. And one of the points that I make in there about, of course, at the time, really being focused on, because the brethren in Memphis, when they were, jumping me with eschatology, they'd get up and they would talk about the same Jesus, the same Jesus. And you have to hear the way they do it, man. You haven't heard it until you hear these brothers do it. The same Jesus. And I just point out, was the Jesus who was in the form of God before his incarnation the same Jesus who became a man, who was made in the likeness of man? And if he went back to be glorified in the same glory that he had before the world was, would he not be the same Jesus? And that's a point that I make in the paper. It's right there on your website. It's in the track. It's in the Presence Ministry's old archives. It's been there for years. This is nothing that we've made up lately. And so for them to say that about you is just gross error. It is, as you say, an Oklahoman LIE. It is just not true. And so to try to make an issue of it from that perspective is just certainly lacking in integrity. And here's the point. Even though they try to use it to discredit you, and obviously there will be, there was some fallout in terms of that from an immediate point of view. But here's the point. If they think that is a strong point, let them challenge it and open the discussion so that we can really get it out on the table.
Here's what's interesting, William. Since the Criswell presentation, I have received a significant number of orders for my book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory, which, of course, is the book in which I lay out my case, the same identical arguments that you made in your article, expanded somewhat, but nonetheless, I certainly lay out my case for believing that the post-resurrection, pre-ascension body of Christ was the same mortal, corruptible body that Jesus had before his passion, and that when he ascended back up on high, he was received back up into glory. He entered into his glory, the glory that he had with the Father before the world began. Luke chapter 24 states that it was at his ascension when he entered into his glory. So he does not have a physical fleshly body now. And, William, I didn't get a chance to share this and to offer the argument, but on this blog, one respondent to the article, agreeing with him about absolutely how horrendous my views are, said, well, when Stephen was being stoned, he looked up and he said, I see the Son of Man. And their argument was, well, if he saw the Son of Man, it must be Jesus in a physical body, because the Son of Man well, I had the same reaction, William. I had the same identical reaction. And I was just astounded at how little thought and how little logic people are so often exhibiting. My immediate thought was, okay, because it says, I see the Son of Man standing, at the right hand, that has to be a physical fleshly body of Jesus. So, okay, Matthew 24, verse 29 and 31, verse 30 particularly, which this individual and those who own the blog where this article was posted, they admit and agree and they teach that verse 30 is speaking of Christ AD 70 coming. Jesus said that in that coming, his coming in AD 70, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. So if the referent to the Son of Man demands Christ in a physical fleshly body in Acts chapter 7, then doesn't that demand that Christ returned in a physical fleshly body in AD 70 according to Matthew 24:30?
That's correct.
But they don't believe that.
Inconsistency there.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So anyway, there has been and continues to be reaction to my presence at Criswell. I have received some really great, just some wonderful, wonderful emails. I've received a couple of emails of people saying, I'd like to know more about your position. I don't think I fully understand it. Can you recommend, further? I heard you mention a book. I don't remember the name, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I've received, a nice number of orders for the book since then. So it's not like what I stated was so absolutely blasphemously shocking that everybody there goes, well, I'll never pay attention to this anymore. Because some people who are there, obviously, are now ordering the book to find out more why I believe what I believe. And that is always encouraging.
Yeah, well, that's, as I said,
that's the very purpose of it.
That's what it was going to trigger. It was going to trigger the curiosity for people to do both things. Some are going to look for it to see if they can refute it. Others are going to look to find out what you are saying so they can see if it's true. They're going to have a mindset of the Bereans and to see if the things that you're saying are so according to the Scriptures. And that's what any honest person ought to do. We don't need to reject something just because a person states it, but see if what they're saying is in accordance to the Word of God. And that's how we grow and how we move forward. Let me say this also for those who are in the chat room and who are listening and who will be listening to the archives. If you have not yet listened to Don's speech from the Criswell Bible College, you can find it at their website, but you can also find it at Don's website. And let me give you how to locate it at his site. If you will go to DonKPreston.com after this broadcast or anytime when you want to look that up, look at the speaking tab and then click on the speaking tab and you will see audio. You'll see the audio button, and then hover your mouse over audio. You should get when you click on that speaking tab, you get audio, and you should see that in a white area drop down. And just click on that, and it will bring up the page that has his recording on it. You can also find that same recording on fulfillradio.com. So we place it there as well. I think it's the last one on the page under the Two Guys in the Bible page there. So just to make sure that you do get an opportunity to listen to that full presentation that Don made. It's an excellent one, and we want to make sure that you are able to access it.
And to pick up on where I started a while ago, I currently have a transcriptionist working on taking that speech and putting it in a manuscript. It is my intent that I'm going to take the material that I presented there. I'm going to add some more material to it. I'm going to obviously do some editing to the style, presentation style that I had down there. But I'm going to produce a small book on this because obviously the issue of the millennium is a tremendously important issue, not only in the entirety of Christianity, but certainly in the preterist movement as well. There are those who are now saying that the millennium began in AD 70. And I have to share this with you, William, and with those who are listening. I'm currently having a written debate with an all-millennialist of the Churches of Christ. His name is Olin Hicks, and William, you know that name well.
Yes.
But for those not familiar with the Churches of Christ, Olin has been well known in the Churches of Christ circles for years. Well, I said it's a debate. Olin is not actually debating. He refuses to answer my arguments. But in my presentation, I pointed out several Old Testament prophecies that predicted the last days, day of the Lord, at the time of the resurrection, the destruction of Satan, and the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Now, all of those elements are found together. And by the way, a lot of this material I use at Criswell in my presentation. But all of these are tied together in these Old Testament passages. And I kept emphasizing that Christ would come, that the end of the millennium, resurrection, the judgment, and Christ's second coming are inextricably tied to the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. In his last negative, William, and I'm pretty sure you haven't read it yet, but in fact, I just posted it today, and I don't suppose you even knew about that. But anyway, in his last negative to my last affirmative, in which I emphasized, really driving home that Christ coming, the end of the millennium resurrection, the judgment, and the avenging of the martyrs all go hand in hand. They are inseparable elements and motifs. Olin Hicks actually went on record as saying Christ's second coming is not at the end of the 1,000 years. He is already there at the beginning of the 1,000 years.
Well, that's really a strange Church of Christ position.
I thought you would appreciate that, William. And folks, for those who may not be familiar with the amillennial view,
the position that... I'm sorry. Go ahead. You got me stirred up.
For those who may not be familiar with the amillennial view, folks, it is identical to the postmillennial view in many, many ways in this regard. The amillennial view believes that the millennium began in the first century. Now, some believe it took place in Jesus' personal ministry as he began to cast out demons, Matthew chapter 12, etc. I personally take the view that the millennium began with the ascension of Christ, with the resurrection of Christ, and he became the first fruits of the dead. Pardon me. And when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive, etc. So that's where I personally posit the beginning of the millennium. But it's essential for those who heard what I just said and may not catch the full irony of what Olin Hicks has said, that virtually all millennialists, as virtually all postmillennialists believe, that the millennium began in the first century. And they believe, and here's what's so critical, they believe vehemently that Christ's second coming, the judgment, and the resurrection occurs at the end of the millennium. But here's Olin Hicks officially taking the position that Christ does not come at the end of the millennium. He's already there. That's premillennialism. And yet he's an amillennialist.
Yeah, a little bit of pen and ink or keystrokes, I think, to be circulated among the churches there on that.
It's really astounding, and it just shows how utterly desperate and rattled Olin Hicks truly is to actually make. And William, you know as well as I do, when the Church of Christ brethren, when the amillennialist brethren read Olin's claim that Christ does not come at the end of the millennium, they're going to fall out of their chairs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just going to be, oh, good grief. Surely he didn't say that. But Olin goes ahead to say, now he submitted his final negative, then he submitted his first affirmative. So what does he say in his first affirmative? The second coming of Christ, the judgment and the resurrection is yet future. Well, for Olin, the end of the millennium is what is yet future. And it's at the end of the millennium that the resurrection and the judgment takes place. Oh, by the way, at the second coming of Christ. So he has met himself coming and going. This is an absolutely inescapable, and I might add, fatal self-contradiction. But it's what happens when men have an eschatology that is so convoluted, such as the amillennial view, that they really do not know what they seriously believe. William, we've seen this over and over and over again, very, very clearly. Olin Hicks had no clue whatsoever that the Old Testament prophecies that I introduced served as the source for the New Testament prophecies of the resurrection, second coming, and judgment. I mean, all he could do in his negatives to say, pardon me, those texts don't say what Preston says. He never attempted to go to a single one and to say, this passage doesn't teach what Don says because look at what it actually says. Well, in the first place, he couldn't do that because all I did was introduce the emphatic, explicit statements of the text themselves, but he never even did it. And when I challenged him over and over and over, please offer some exegetical evidence for rejecting my arguments and address my arguments, he said, I don't have to address your arguments. I don't have to engage in exegesis of those texts. All I have to do is to show that you're wrong. Well, what he then did in order to show that I was wrong is to say, Christ clearly has not come because all you got to do is look around. The world's still here.
Yeah.
Now that's just stunning.
That's profound.
That's profound. I mean,
yeah.
Just absolutely stunning.
Well, Don, we had originally planned to interact with some material from End Times Controversy with Thomas Ice, who wrote some implications of fulfilled Bible prophecy. And I think those implications actually fall right in line with the kind of things that we're talking about. And at the same time would be good for us to at least begin a discussion on. I'm sure we won't finish it today. But, and I kind of titled the lesson From Doom to Boom, because I think that's really what people ought to be perceiving as it relates to this futurist eschatology compared to fulfilled eschatology. Because there really is a boom when we think about all that we have in Christ today and as a result. But let me enumerate them, and then you decide where you want to start with them. But in the End Times Controversy, Thomas Ice wrote this book was edited back in 2003, and by Tim LaHaye and Thomas Ice. And, of course, I'm sure you know the name Tim LaHaye for sure. But under the topic of why futurism, he said that if fulfilled Bible prophecy is true, if the preterist view is true, these are some of the implications that he understands. And when you listen to them, you will see that these are the very things that we have been saying, and he is astute enough to grasp them and understand the significance of them. Number one, the rapture of the church is impossible. Number two, premillennialism cannot be true. Number three, and this is huge, Israel does not have a future national blessing. Think about that in the premillennial camp. Number four, the current nation of Israel is not prophetically significant. Number five, our current state of existence would have to be the millennial kingdom or the new heavens and new earth. And, of course, we would opt for the new heavens and new earth on that.
Certainly.
Number six, there will be no future Antichrist and false prophet. Number seven, none of the tribulation events should be of concern to us or our future generations in terms of experiencing, and I would say that that's what he means. Mm-hmm. And then number eight, his closing statement, which I really like, is, in short, the perspective of Christianity for millions of believers would be very different because our view of the future would change significantly. For all the people who are always asking, so what, and what's the implications of the preterist view, the full preterist view, here are the premillennial dispensationalists telling us what they are. I mean, we already know them, but even they acknowledge how significant this is. And
William, when you sent that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
When you sent that quote to me today, I literally laughed. And concerning the last three or four especially, no man of sin, no great tribulation, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going, and this is bad?
Yeah.
I must say, William, I'm reminded at Florida some years ago, at one of the conferences I spoke down there, they actually invited a dispensationalist to speak. Yes, you were there. And you will remember, William, that this guy got up and graphically spoke of the Battle of Armageddon, the 200 million strong army, and blood being up to the horses' bridles. And this man then stating, and the wonderful thing about it is, I get to watch. And I'll never forget, I wasn't sitting with you at the time. I was sitting up in the balcony with John Anderson, actually, at the moment, when the guy made the statement. And John's jaw and my jaw both hit the floor at the same time. We turned and just stared at one another. And John goes, "Did I just hear that?" And I said, "Yeah, you did." Here was a guy reveling in the morbid desire to see blood flowing up to the horses' bridles. The great thing about it is I get to watch. And continued to talk about how Jesus himself personally was going to tread out the blood, stomp their blood, and make it flow that high. And I was just so staggered by such a carnal, materialistic view of Armageddon, of the desire of people to actually watch this stuff. I mean, in the first place, they obviously have no sense of the very nature of apocalyptic language, figurative, symbolic language.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second place, they have such a morbid desire to want to watch, such a literalistic understanding of those apocalyptic passages. Well, it was staggering. But back to Thomas Ice's statement, he very clearly sees that if preterism is true, there is no rapture of the church. Well, that's right. But that also means, since there's no rapture of the church, there's no man of sin. Well, I don't know about you, William, but that's pretty good news.
I think so.
And of course, striking at the very heart of Thomas Ice's entire little discourse there is that means that Israel has no prophetic future. It means that Israel today is not prophetically significant. Well, that's exactly precisely what we as preterists have been saying for a long, long time. I wrote a book entitled Israel, 1948, Countdown to Nowhere. It's gone through 2 or 3 printings, I've forgotten which, and I state in that book overtly, explicitly, clearly, modern-day Israel and the events of 1948 are not prophetically significant. They are not the fulfillment of prophecy. And so here's Thomas Ice. He recognizes that is absolutely true. And yet, William, I don't have to tell you, we live in a world that is just absolutely inundated with the concept, the idea that modern-day Israel must remain as God's chosen people. Now, by the way, I have to share this little bit of news. I've been corresponding with a guy from England, and he is shall we say, a new preterist. And he's just absolutely alive and on fire with what he is learning. He's been sharing it, and he comes from and still associates in dispensational circles. Well, he's been sharing my audios, he's been sharing my writings and articles with as many people who are willing to listen, who are willing to read. And he wrote me just recently, and he said, Don, I've got to tell you, your name is really being taken in vain over here a lot. He said, people are attacking you on the right hand and on the left hand. They are just, they are really getting after you. And he said, but I'm defending you. And he, William, I think you know the name of Stephen Sizer,
yes,
who is a very active anti-Zionist, not an anti-Israeli, but he is an anti-Zionist. And he's very, very strong and very influential in England. And this gentleman told me that Stephen Sizer, who is not a full preterist, by the way, I'm not trying to apply that, but nonetheless, he has been defending my writings on blogs over there. So this is absolutely fantastic that the folks in England are getting all stirred up about the preterist message. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's absolutely astounding. And, it's as Thomas Ice says, if this view is true, which we understand it is, premillennialism cannot be true. So they understand the impact. And then with what you're just saying about Zionism particularly, and about Israel being prophetically significant, look at how that's going to change worldview. I mean, I think preterists ought to be excited about the impact of this message and what it has to offer to the world.
No doubt whatsoever. William, do you remember when we were in Australia 2 years ago, and that congregation of Rob Cunningham, who's done such a marvelous job of planting the seeds of preterism there, when I began to talk about the implications of preterism for the world, for foreign policy, et cetera, and how excited that group of young people in that church got, of how they could take the message of covenant eschatology and literally change the world. And, folks, I got to tell you, this is a congregation of what, William, 250, 260 people?
Yes.
Something like that. The majority of whom, well, I should say over 50%, were young people, but who were just so vibrantly excited about covenant eschatology. And when I talked about the implications of covenant eschatology, its potential for changing the world, I've never had so many amens in all of my life. I've just never experienced that.
That's right. I mean, they caught the significance of the message. They caught the positive nature of the message. They caught the worldwide impact of the message, and they were excited to be a part of something that they know they would have a significant role in being catalysts for this change.
And it just, I know you and I talked an awful lot about it, about the incredible enthusiasm and the depth of their biblical knowledge, by the way, folks, of this just young person after young person after young person walking up to William and to me and asking some of the best theological questions you can imagine. And you're going, wait a minute, you're not old enough to be asking those questions, But again, Rob Cunningham, the minister there, has obviously done such a marvelous job of teaching and instructing and sharing covenant eschatology with them, and has just piqued the curiosity of all of these young people and the entire congregation, not just the young people, but that's what impressed William and me so much is how young these people were and how enthused they were about Bible study and about learning this message. So it's incredible. But here is a group of people, again, in Wagga Wagga, Australia, this group of young people, this congregation of preterists, and boy, do they ever see the implications of what Thomas Ice was writing. If preterism is true, Israel is no longer the chosen people of God. If preterism is true, current affairs in Israel are not the fulfillment of prophecy. Israel and the events today are not prophetically significant. They get it. And boy, it's high time that the preterist community fully gets this and William, you and I have both seen situations in which, you see people and they sort of kind of see the message of covenant eschatology, but they still don't really honestly, quote, get it, unquote.
Yeah, and Dunn, while you're on the subject of covenant eschatology, we just had a question in the chat room concerning what is covenant eschatology, and I sent back a response in writing. But why don't you elaborate a little bit more on what it is? Because I perceive from the question that we have maybe some new people in who may not be as aware of it as some of the others are. By the way, Brian Lewis is in as well, so he's a heavyweight. He understands it quite well. But at any rate,
who was that?
Brian Lewis.
Oh, fantastic! My greetings to Brian. Great friend. Okay, I define covenant eschatology, and William is more than welcome to chime in and correct me and whatever. But my definition of covenant eschatology is that biblical eschatology is concerned with the end of the old covenant age of Israel, her covenant world, which is referred to as heaven and earth in Isaiah 65, for instance, and other places as well, Matthew 5:17 and 18. But my belief is that biblical eschatology, okay, the story of the second coming, the judgment, and the resurrection, is not concerned with what we would call historical eschatology, that is, the end of history, the end of time, nor is it concerned with the end of the Christian age. The Christian age is explicitly stated to be, numerous times in Scripture, without end, okay? Without end. How can we talk about the end of time or the end of the Christian age when the Bible defines the Christian age as that which cannot be moved, that which cannot be shaken, that which cannot be replaced? Hebrews chapter 12, 25 to 28. So when people start talking about the end of the Christian age and the end of time, they're talking about something that the Bible prima facie rejects by positing the Christian age itself as something that will never pass away. Jesus, as he stood on the Mount of Olives, discussing the passing of the temple, which, by the way, according to Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, said the Jews referred to and called heaven and earth. That is, they called the holy place earth. They called the most holy place heaven because it was the abode of God. Pardon me. But in Matthew 24, Jesus was predicting the destruction of that temple, and he said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words, that's his world, that's his covenant world, that's his age, will never pass away. Well, how much more explicit can words be than this? On the contrary of that, diametrically opposed to that, Jesus predicted the destruction of that temple which was the very epitome, the very expression of the old covenant age of the law of Moses. Jesus said, the time is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. The disciples immediately said, tell us when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your parousia and the end of the age. By the way, it's not coming. It's parousia, which means presence. Parousia is not coming. It's not a verb, all right? But be that as it may, the disciples immediately and properly linked the destruction of the temple with the end of the age and Christ's presence. Now, it's really regrettable to me that the majority of commentaries say that the disciples were mistaken. They inadvertently or ignorantly or foolishly, but bottom line is they wrongly linked Christ's coming with the end of the age. No, they had every right to link the end of the age and Christ's parousia with that temple because the Old Testament for instance, in Daniel chapter 12, directly linked the resurrection to eternal life to the time of the destruction of the power of the holy people, Daniel 12, verse 2 to 7. Isaiah 65, that I've already alluded to, linked the arrival of the new heaven and the new earth with the destruction of the old heaven and the old earth at the time at which God said, speaking to Old Covenant Israel, I will destroy you, I will slay you, and call my people by a new name. Pardon me. And over, and by the way, in my book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory, I develop all of this extensively, in depth, with an examination of the nature of apocalyptic language, and by apocalyptic language, I mean the language that talks about the destruction of heaven and earth, the Lord coming with the angels in flaming fire, with a shout, with a trumpet, etc., etc. That's how some scholars describe apocalyptic language. There's a lot of scholarly debate on how to define, quote, apocalyptic language, unquote, but that's what I mean by this. Apocalyptic language is the language used by the biblical writers. We sometimes call it decreation language, in which the language seems to describe the passing of the cosmos, the coming of God out of heaven, and the creation of a new world. Well, it's all metaphoric, it's figurative, never intended to be taken literally. So, in sum, covenant eschatology is the story of the end of the Old Covenant world. And why was God going to bring the Old Covenant world to an end? Because it was the epitome of, the expression of, and the exacerbation of sin and death. It was called the law or the ministration of death, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. So when Yahweh, who gave that law, which was a ministration of death, promised to give a new covenant, which would be a covenant that could give life, then the transition from a ministration of death to the ministration of life is nothing less than resurrection. And again, I developed this in that book that I mentioned earlier, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory. This is a resurrection motif. Here is death under Torah. Here is life under Christ. Has nothing to do with biological death. It has everything to do with sin death, the kind of death that Adam and Eve died the day they sinned, Genesis chapter 2, 15 and following. This is what is at stake with the end of the Old Covenant age of Israel in AD 70, when Jesus was manifested as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He came in the glory of the Father. He came the same way the Father had come in the Old Testament many times, and he did it for the same reason that Yahweh had come many times in the Old Testament. And, William, I got to shut up here so you can speak. But
well, I was just going to say we have about a minute and a half left, and I wanted to, kind of start wrapping up here. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our guests who are with us tonight, and we appreciate you so much. We're going to make sure that we are here every week, Lord willing, and we encourage you to come back and to invite your friends and family. Also, I want to encourage you to check out Dunn's website, eschatology.org, BibleProphecy.com, and DunnKPreston.com, but particularly the first two, where you can get access to his books and materials. And for those of you who are new, you might want to look at something called Can God Tell Time, which is a great book that Dunn wrote. It's very it's a small book, but at the same time, it's chock full of very impactful information. Now, he has some other great books as you progress along the way. We want you to take advantage of those as well. Eschatology.org is his website, and that's where you can go and learn much more. You can also visit my website at allthingsfulfilled.com for a lot of blog posts as well. Dunn and I really appreciate, once again, you all being with us tonight. We're going to continue on some of the studies that we've talked about this week, as well as introduce some new ones in the coming days. But we're going to stay right here because we like the idea of being able to communicate with you through the room, have that immediate feedback. And so we really, really appreciate that. So with that done, I'm going to say good night, and
I will say good night as well. Good night. God bless, and thanks, everyone, for joining us.
all right, ladies and gentlemen, have a good week, and we'll be back to see you on next Tuesday. God bless. Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.